Hey there, I'm Nick.
And I'm Lewis.
Welcome to The Collective Cast, a podcast by and for indie app developers.
We're here to have an open and honest conversation about the highs and lows of app development.
So what are we talking about this week? We've got a couple topics on the table, the first of which is upgrade pricing. What have you got for us, Lewis?
Yeah, so the upgrade pricing has been in the kind of Apple news a little bit again this week. And it came about, first of all, because Phil Schiller did an interview and he said he was asked about upgrade pricing specifically, and he basically said, "It ain't never going to happen, guys, so why do you keep asking me these questions?" And then another chap called Dan Council, who's made a bunch of apps, particularly on the Mac, has kind of built up this kind of plea for Apple to start doing upgrade pricing. And he's saying this is, he thinks that subscriptions are not the answer. The title of his piece is "Subscription-Based Pricing is Not the Answer." And so I just kind of wanted to talk through a few things around it with you, just to kind of clear up my own thoughts on it and get your opinion and so on. And so the thrust of what Phil said is that basically subscription pricing is the way to go. Lots of the big companies do this now. This is really the predominant model with people like Adobe. Everything has moved to subscription. Microsoft Office now is only subscription. And these are like the biggest software vendors in the world. And he's saying kind of upgrade pricing is not as good for the users, and therefore it is, as far as developers are concerned, we should just, we should do what's best for consumers, and that is Apple's approach with the subscription-based model.
Sure. So it sounds like what Phil Schiller is kind of saying, like he's kind of promoting the kind of it's software as a service, right? Like, except it's not actually service-based software. It's just like pretending your software is a service.
Yeah, so instead of the service, so this is one of the interesting things, is that the idea of a service is, what I assume you mean by a service is that it's a server and some information lives not on your computer or iPhone, but lives centrally, on my server and is looked after by me.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that is kind of, yeah, so then you've got that aspect to it, and then the kind of SaaS model, I guess, is the whole software lives on the web server, and then the option, which the kind of third option, which is the way that Apple is sort of pushing towards, is that the software could possibly live entirely just as desktop or iOS software, but you pay a monthly or annual fee in order to keep using it. And the kind of difference between that and upgrade pricing is that you only have to charge for an upgrade when you do a major new release, and that kind of gives you more flexibility. So you don't have to do a new upgrade every month or every year. You could do it every 18 months or every 13.7 months or whatever it is.
Yeah. As the developer, you also have the privilege of, actually, yeah, sorry, you said it right. Like, as a developer, you can say, I can release something every month, every year, it doesn't matter. And as a user, you can say, hey, I'm really happy with this version. I don't need to upgrade right now. But then in the future, if a great version comes along, a new feature that you want, you can pay to upgrade. But you're not kind of forced into a funnel, whereas I do feel like, yeah, with a subscription model, regardless of the benefits, you are kind of stuck paying a recurring fee for something, and you have no ability. It's like having Netflix, right? Like, you don't have access to any individual piece of media. You have access to the service itself.
Yeah. And so I think for me, the thing where upgrade pricing will be most useful is for when you've got a really huge piece of software. So it almost makes the most sense for something like Photoshop. When you get a new version, it's hopefully a significant upgrade, and the old version is still such a significant piece of software that if it's £600 and then it's £100 to upgrade, then I think that kind of makes sense. Maybe you don't want to pay the £100 for the new features. But for what, or at least for what I'm talking or thinking about, is more iOS apps where they're kind of at the most £5 in the first place. And for me, I think the subscriptions is a good model, because I think £5 a year, I think makes it much more sustainable for me, and it kind of allows me to get a bit more predictable income, and it allows me to do. I mean, the biggest thing, which kind of is self-imposed by Apple, but the biggest thing with the way that the subscriptions is now implemented is that kind of free trials, which were traditionally Steve Jobs absolutely swore off, they are now kind of almost a given with a subscription. So you get a week or a month free trial, and then you automatically move into a paid subscription.
You're actually, for you, you're actually saying what Phil Schiller is saying works well with the way you want to build apps.
Yeah, I think for me, I would rather do a subscription than an upgrade pricing. I can see the. I mean, I guess the ideal would be to have both, but I feel like if it was me, there's hardly any apps that I use that if I really use them a lot, that I would be unhappy paying a subscription. As long as the subscription isn't silly, if it's good value to pay a few pounds a year, and that means that I'm going to get that there's more chance of the software being updated and kept up to date, then I think that that is good value.
Yeah, that no, that makes sense. And when you bring up the difference between upgrade pricing, I do think back when I used to do Flash and Flex development. The Flex Builder development app from Adobe was not Photoshop expensive, but it was very expensive, like somewhere between 1 and 500 US. And then depending on if you had like this year's version, upgrading to next year's version would only be $100. But if you let it lapse for 2 years, then it would be $200 or $300. And so what I would do is whenever I would have a new client come along that required something from a newer version, I would pay the one-time upgrade, and then that work with that client would cover it, and then I wouldn't worry about it, because I wasn't using it all the time. And so I do favor the upgrade pricing in that context, but you're definitely right about if we're building something like I have travel tipping apps, you have time widgets, and if there is like small subscription income, it is both an incentive to us to keep it active and relevant, but also like hopefully keeping your users like involved too, and not just having something that you use, a couple times a year.
Yeah, I agree. And so I think for something like a utility, it makes less sense. But for my other app, which is a weight loss tracking app, which at the moment doesn't have a server-side component, but I think as far as a lot of my users are concerned, it does. It's kind of a funny thing, but I often get messages from people saying, "Can you recover my data for me?" Like, nope, there is no server-side kind of following Apple's line on this at the moment. But either way, I still feel like if I'm going to spend a significant amount of time developing and supporting and working on the app, it doesn't really matter whether there is a server component or not, because the server components are so cheap these days that it really isn't a big cost unless you have millions and millions of users. It isn't a big deal to have a server component versus to have an amazing UI and lots of features and just keeping up with everything that Apple introduces every year with new features and trying to keep on board with that is almost more value than just because the data happens to live on a server.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me on to something where I disagree with, or not disagree with Apple, but where I'm less happy with Apple, and that is the testing of this stuff. So the testing of the subscription stuff, and I'm just finding. So my plan, as I mentioned last week, I think, is to move from a paid model to a free model with a subscription. So currently it's paid up front, and then it's going to drop, and users will get a free trial, and it will be a monthly subscription. And so people who've paid already, they will just get everything. There's no subscription for them, but new users have to pay. And just kind of testing that transition with what Apple give you is just proving very frustrating. And I'm just in fear of this stuff going wrong. I've had a few bad experiences, and it's just so difficult to test. And Apple, the documentation is so light, and they don't really recommend the best way to do particular things. So, for example, what you're meant to do is you're meant to check a receipt that exists on the device, and you check that, you send that off to a server, and it tells you what the state of play is. But when the app is first downloaded, that receipt isn't there, and they have to do a restore purchase for that to come down and stuff like that. And it's just all this stuff is just not very well documented. And it's kind of a black box, and it's really frustrating. And it works differently in the sandbox environment to how it works in the real life. And yeah, I'm feeling like I'm more on top of it now, but I don't know. I just don't have a comfortable feeling with it compared to when I do just a normal update where I know that everything is going to is going to work, and it's easy to do, much easier to do those tests.
Yeah, I when you were mentioning the receipts, it does remind me of when you test out in-app purchases. Like if you have a brand new app and you want to test out the in-app purchases, it's kind of a pain, right? Because you have to build all the like local plist information and you have to have everything ready, but it doesn't actually exist yet on the server side because you have to get a build approved and then get the in-app purchases approved. And there's this whole process where there's like a solid period of time where you're not sure if it's going to work at all. And it's so irritating because I know what you mean, where if you create a test iTunes Connect user in order to test your in app purchase, the restore functionality and the buy purchase functionality work very differently than if you were just a regular logged in iTunes user engaging in that functionality. And it's like you have to somehow be smart enough to understand that, like, oh, this is how it's working right now, but it won't work like that for your users.
Yeah, exactly. And so, if anyone from Apple is listening, here's what I would like. In the test mode, we can go and see which people have subscribed, what their status is, and all that kind of thing, and actually just make that information available in like a web console so that we can see what's going on, and then we can also delete the subscription or the in-app purchase and just have one account, and then you just disable the or delete the in-app purchase, and then you can start again from scratch instead of having to create a gajillion users every time you want to do anything.
That would be so good because, yeah, like every time I come out with a new app or a new set of in app purchases, I always build a new iTunes Connect user. But then once you've done a purchase for them once, it always, like you said, it'll be like, oh, it looks like you've already purchased this item, which means you don't get that fresh experience. And yeah, like it would be super nice just to have a little console to manage the situation.
Yeah. And also, while I'm ranting, why do I have to put in all of this, the crazy details like my favorite town when I was young and all that security stuff for test users that just don't have a credit card and can't do anything anyway? It's silly. I just want to create the users quickly. If I'm going to have to create users for everything, why do I have to verify their email address and all that stuff and spend like ages of time just setting up just stuff just to do tests?
Oh my god, yeah. I am co sponsoring that legislation because the password requirements drive me nuts because you have to have a minimum length, uppercase, lowercase characters. I think you have to have letters, numbers, and you might even need a special character. And when you're typing that, since the simulator doesn't work with the in app purchases or I assume subscriptions, you have to do this on your phone, which means you are typing in a complex, stupid password over and over.
And also disconnecting your regular iTunes account and all this kind of stuff.
Which, by the way, if you forget to restore your iTunes account and then you go do something, everything gets weird.
Yeah, exactly. And you get these password prompts randomly, and you don't know whether that's because something your app's done or because of, yeah, exactly. And I've had an old iPhone that I was been meaning to, and I actually had sent it off to, to get the money from one of these trade-in iPhone things. And then for whatever reason, they sent it back because they did, and I've been using it for testing, and it's been great. And I actually might not send it back and just keep it just for this stuff.
Oh, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, just keep like your last model of iPhone as a testing device.
Yeah, exactly. And normally you don't really need it, but for this stuff, where anything to do with iTunes, it does save a lot of frustration, I think.
Yeah, it would just be basically if just the simulator were not handicapped. I don't know why they handicap the simulator in those situations.
No, me neither. And that seems to be trending better. Like iCloud, like Drive and stuff like that now all works.
Yeah, I mean like with all things, we of course understand most of the reasons why Apple or other companies do them, but it doesn't mean they don't piss us off.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
I actually have a question for you, Lewis, about subscriptions because I haven't implemented any subscriptions in any apps I've built yet. If you build an app that has a subscription, you have said that there is a free trial period and everything, but can you have, say, a free app where the advanced functionality is a subscription? So the app is free, but you could like activate the subscription, or is it like it's a subscription from the get-go?
You can do both. So my model is, which is just based on changing from in-app purchase to a subscription. So my model is that there are some free features, and there are pro features, and if you pay the subscription, then you get the pro features. And I think that is the most common model. But there certainly are apps as well where it's just all or nothing. It's like the first thing you get is sign up for a subscription. If you don't sign up, there basically is no app. And I was kind of thinking, I can see the advantage of that as well. And for some apps, I think especially for the one where I've seen that is very content heavy. And so, I can see just saying you get this content or you don't get anything.
Right. Well, yeah, like say it's like the New York Times digital magazine or something like that. The free trial seems like the thing you get. So there's no app without some kind of subscription. So there's no point in having a free version of that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I had a random one off thought about upgrading. You could almost get away with upgrade pricing through in app purchases where, you had your basic app or whatnot, and the in app purchase could enable like the upgrades, but it would be kind of janky, but you could do it.
I've read about people doing this kind of thing, and it just gets you can do it to a point, but say you have so that works for the first upgrade, but when you get to the second upgrade, are you going to require people to buy like version 2 as an IAP and then version 3 as an IAP?
Oh God, you're right. You know what I guess I could see you doing if there was a way to, okay, you have app 1.0 and then you come up with app 2.0 and you have an in-app purchase to upgrade. At the same time, you take app 1.0 off the App Store and replace it with app 2.0. So new users start with 2.0, but old users can do an in-app purchase to 2.0, and somehow you could maintain the code base, but I also just confused myself in saying that.
Yeah, and so another way that some people have done it, have kind of gotten around it, is like the bundles. So you can do, a while ago, Apple allowed you to do bundles where if it's like, say you've got 5 apps that are £1 each, but you can put them in a bundle where it's £3 for all 5 apps. And you can do that so you could have version 2, version 1 is £3, version 2 is £3. But if you've got version 1, then you can buy the bundle and it's only an extra £1 or whatever it is. And then that kind of gets around it again. But again, it's a hack and it doesn't really work in a long term way. Yeah, it's I don't know. You probably could hack it that way with multiple bundles and stuff like that. But that just is really confusing for your customers. And I think a subscription is actually more straightforward. It's like you have to pay some amount each time, or every month or every year. And while you're paying, you've got the service, and you know that some money is going towards the developer. I kind of feel like those are the customers that you want. There's so many people who just aren't going to pay no matter what, and they just don't care, and that's totally fine. And but those aren't the people you want. The people who you want are the people who do want to pay, and those people are maybe more likely to say, okay, I'll pay every year because I'm getting a lot of value from this.
It's funny though. Speaking about apps that have subscription models and upgrades and everything, kind of brings me to what is quite a sad rant, which is the impending death of Wunderlist. And Wunderlist, for those who don't know, is a to-do list manager, just for task tracking and that sort of thing. It is great because it has an iPhone version, a web interface, a native Mac app. It can be used among teams, and it has Slack integration. So it's basically the greatest to-do list on this planet, except about a year ago, they got acquired by Microsoft, and they said, don't worry, nothing's going to happen for a while. But they said once Microsoft figures out what it's going to do, Wunderlist will probably sunset. Well, a couple weeks ago, Microsoft released To-Do List. And it is basically take all the best things about Wunderlist, and Microsoft kind of grabbed all of those and is doing their own to-do list app, which means Wunderlist is now on a death watch, which means I need to find a new to-do list manager, which is super sad.
So have you looked at the Microsoft one? It sounds like that could be a way to go if it's the edited highlights of Wunderlist.
That was exactly my thought too, except there was a very nice blog post that I'll put in the show notes that kind of compared Microsoft, it's hard since it's called To-Do List, Microsoft To-Do List 1.0 versus Wunderlist, and it has a lot of the very nice list features of Wunderlist, but I think and I might be wrong here, I think it's missing both the team aspect and this really clever idea called today, where any to-dos that are set to be due today or have expired show up in this one view, so you can kind of see like at a glance what is due and overdue. And the today feature and the team aspect are the two most important parts for me. So that means Microsoft To Do is no good. And I've already, like, I ranted on Twitter about this, and I think the AnyDo guys, the AnyDo team, reached out and were like, try AnyDo. So that might be the one I go for next. But it's just a sad moment when you have to sunset your to-do list manager.
I think the other one I would recommend to look at, which I don't use myself, but I have used for a bit, is called Todoist. And that is, that has all of the things that you mentioned, and it has like a web API, so you can hook it into various services easily and everything. And so integration is a big part of their thing. And they also have a today view and things like that. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, it sounds so silly. Of course, what tasks are due today? But when I have like a bunch of different to-do lists and some have different sets of team members, and so sometimes you want to see just what your tasks to do today are, it's like one of those obvious, crazy, useful features.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can't have too much clarity on your task list.
Exactly. And it's so I guess that's less of a rant and more just a sad face.
Yeah, absolutely. A moment's silence for the impending passing of Wunderlist.
A moment of silence. All right, and with that, I think we are now at the part of the pod where we discuss our crazy app ideas. Even though sometimes they're not crazy, they're just apps we wish someone else would build for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
What have you got for us this week?
So this week I've got something that's on my list, and that's something that I've actually solved myself in another way in the meantime, but I still think it would be a good idea for a lot of people. And so there's a Mac app called Self-Control, which allows you to basically blacklist a bunch of websites, and it does some magic, and basically you can't get on Facebook for a certain amount of time, so say an hour, and it's just Facebook is shut, and it really allows you to concentrate. And I think that this is functionality that should be available on iOS as well, so that you can just make Facebook and Twitter and whatever your distraction is on your iPhone, that should be not available for a certain period of time. And so, yeah, make it happen, people. I don't know how practical it is. I think it's probably quite difficult to do, but I still think it would be a good idea.
I agree. I think that would be. You know, when you have one of those issues where you're trying to focus on a task, but your mind isn't really, into it. So you're bouncing between like Twitter and Facebook and refreshing your email and kind of doing anything but approaching the task. A filter like that would actually be pretty good if it was like, stop clicking over to Facebook and just focus on what you should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, from my files, the crazy app idea I've pulled out, if our listeners aren't already aware, both Lewis and I are digital nomads. And so an idea I had come up with a couple years back was a digital nomad blog title generator.
Oh, I love it.
Because there was a joke a few years ago about the hipster restaurant name generator, which is always fun, where it's like Peace and Anvil, or, Carrot and Monkey. And it's like two crossed objects in an X fashion with one word or one letter on each side. And, the same thing kind of forward for digital nomads, because for those who aren't nomads, there are many among us who they get started with a travel blog, so it'll be like the Wanderlusters or the Vagabonding Digitravelers.
Yeah, that sounds good. You should do that as 7 and 7 promo.
I think maybe I will. I think I had put it down as I would do like a one-page like site generator. So, if you just went to like digitalnomadbloggenerator.co or something, it would just give you one of those names.
Yeah, it's a plan. I like it.
I'll put it in the list of things I should do at some point, but may never actually get to.
That big old list.
That big old list. The App Collective podcast is created by us, Nick and Lewis. The editing is all done by me, so I apologize for basically everything.
But if you like the podcast, make sure to hit subscribe and maybe leave a review in iTunes to let us know what you think. You can find us on Twitter to share feedback and continue the conversation. Nick's at nsneebly and I'm at Itinerant Dev. The show's at App Collective Co.
And finally, we'd love it if you join us on Patreon. It's dangerous to go alone, and even $1 helps support us directly as app developers. There's loads of perks, and we've got a great Slack community to discuss current and future apps. You can check it all out at podcast.appcollective.co.
Here we